Elaine thought she was about to embrace the son she lost 20 years ago. But when Dr. Phill opened the DNA envelope, her entire world fell apart. A man's identity shattered, a mother's hope collapsed, and the truth that surfaced next didn't just break hearts. It exposed a secret no one was ready to face. The cameras didn't just capture a reunion. They captured the moment truth replaced love, and everyone had to decide which one mattered more. The stage lights were blinding, reflecting off the polished floor like sunlight on water. The audience murmured, sensing the weight of what was about to happen. Elaine sat trembling on the left couch, holding a framed photograph. Her son Jacob, missing since he was 2 years old. The picture was old, edges worn from years of hoping. Across from her sat Mark, 32, calm but nervous, his hands clasped tight, as if holding on to something invisible. Dr. Phill leaned forward, voice low and deliberate. "Elaine," he said, "after years of searching, we may finally have your answer." The audience leaned in. Cameras zoomed. Mark smiled softly, as if he could already feel the hug that would change everything. Elaine's lips quivered into a prayer. But then, the envelope opened. Dr. Phil's expression shifted, not dramatic, not cruel, just still. He looked down at the paper again, as though hoping the letters might rearrange themselves. "Elaine." "Mark?" His voice trembled slightly. "The test results show that you are not biologically related." The studio fell silent. You could hear a chair creak in the back row. Elaine blinked once, twice. The color drained from her face. No, that can't be right." Mark shook his head, whispering, "I don't understand." For years, both had carried the same dream. Now, it vanished in one sentence. The cameras caught Elaine's shaking hands, the way she gripped that photo like it might still rewrite reality. Dr. Phill tried to comfort her, but the truth was unmovable. The story that began as a reunion suddenly turned into an identity crisis. And in that moment, Mark wasn't just a stranger to Elaine. He was a stranger to himself. As the credits for that day's episode rolled, Dr. Phil's producers exchanged uneasy glances. This wasn't how it was supposed to end. But deep down, they all knew this was only the beginning. Would you still call someone family if the truth said otherwise? 3 weeks before that moment under the blinding lights, Elaine sat alone in her kitchen. The hum of the refrigerator filled the silence, the kind that only people who've lived with regret understand. Then came the knock at the door, gentle, hesitant. On her porch lay an envelope, postmarked from Ohio. Her hands trembled as she tore it open. Inside, a letter written in neat cursive, "I think I'm your son." Beneath the words was a photograph. A man in his 30s, standing by a lake. Same soft eyes, same half-smile as her late husband, Peter. Elaine gasped. The room seemed to tilt as tears blurred the image. She whispered, "Jacob." For 20 years, she had lived with one unanswered question. What happened to her little boy that night in the hospital when the nurse said he didn't make it? There was no body, no closure, just paperwork and pity. And now, a stranger's letter reopened the wound. Meanwhile, hundreds of miles away, Mark sat in his small apartment surrounded by adoption files and old photographs. His parents, the ones who raised him, had both passed within months of each other. On their deathbed, they told him the truth. "You're not our biological son. We found you through an agency that no longer exists." For Mark, the world suddenly fell hollow. The people he loved had built a life on silence. He had no roots, just a hospital bracelet with a faded name. Jacob. That name became his anchor. When he found Elaine's missing child story online, the photos, the details, the timeline, everything seemed to click. It wasn't just similar. It was identical. He thought, maybe I finally belong somewhere. The first phone call between Elaine and Mark was emotional chaos wrapped in hope. Elaine could barely speak. "Mark," she said through tears, "I knew you'd come back." Mark replied, "I knew you were real." They spoke for hours about the things they'd both lost, the dreams they had about each other, even the guilt that never left them. But under all that emotion, tiny cracks appeared. Dates didn't quite match. The hospital name wasn't exactly right. Elaine brushed it off. Hope is louder than doubt. When Dr. Phil's team reached out, offering a DNA test and a televised reunion. Elaine hesitated. But her sister said, "It's time. The world deserves to see your miracle." And so, 3 weeks later, both Elaine and Mark boarded separate flights to Los Angeles. Hearts full, logic muted. Neither of them could see the storm waiting beneath the surface. Because when love blinds us, the truth has to scream to be heard. Backstage, just hours before the taping, the studio buzzed with quiet chaos. Cameras being tested, crew whispering through headsets, producers rehearsing the emotional beats. But in a small office down the hall, a young researcher named Dana stared at her computer screen, frozen. She'd been tasked with verifying the hospital paperwork for the show's legal clearance. What she found instead didn't add up. There were 2 infants born at the same hospital on the same night, at the same time, but to different mothers. Both boys listed under temporary ID, Baby A. The records should have been separated long ago. Yet, somehow they weren't. Dana frowned, scrolling. One mother's name was Elaine Whitmore, the other, Clara Dean. And at the top of the file, a red stamp read, "Sealed by court order." 2003, a chill ran through her. Meanwhile, in the dressing room, Elaine was having her makeup done. She smiled nervously at the mirror, holding that same photo of her missing boy. "This is it," she whispered. "He's coming home." The stylist smiled politely, unaware of the paper trail unspooling just a few doors away. Down the hall, Mark sat alone with his thoughts. He replayed his childhood memories like a movie reel, birthdays, bedtime stories, the day he found out he was adopted. He remembered his mother's last words before she passed. "There's more to your story than we ever told you." He didn't know what she meant back then. Now, he feared he was about to find out. Dana debated whether to bring the file to Dr. Phil's team. It wasn't her job to meddle, but she couldn't ignore it either. She printed the documents, her hands shaking. "If this is true," she whispered, "someone's been living a lie for 20 years. When the segment producer glanced at the papers, her expression shifted instantly. "Where did you get this?" she demanded. "Danas ta meurtre, public archive." But it was sealed. The producer exhaled sharply. This wasn't just a reunion anymore. It was a potential scandal. The kind of revelation that could break hearts or destroy reputations. "Do we tell Dr. Phill before the taping?" Dana asked. The producer hesitated. "If we're wrong, we ruin everything. If we're right," she trailed off, staring at the glowing monitor that showed Elaine and Mark rehearsing their first meeting. "We ruin everyone." Minutes before the cameras rolled, Dana placed the file in a manila envelope and left it on Dr. Phil's desk. She hoped he'd read it in time, but fate had other plans. As the studio lights flicked on and the audience applauded, Dr. Phill was handed the other envelope, the one with the DNA results. The silent file sat unopened beneath a stack of papers, waiting for someone brave enough to look. Backstage, Mark overheard 2 crew members whispering. "Something's off with the hospital records," one said. "They found another mother's name." Mark froze. "Another mother?" he murmured to himself. His chest tightened. In that moment, a lifetime of certainty began to unravel. He didn't know it yet, but the name Clara Dean would soon change everything he thought he knew about who he was. If the truth was hiding in plain sight, would you have the courage to open it? When the show ended, Elaine was escorted to a quiet room backstage. The crowd was gone, the lights dimmed, but the silence felt heavier than the cameras ever had. Mark sat across from her, pale and speechless, still processing the truth that had shattered both of them. Dr. Phil's producers debated what to do next. The sealed hospital file was finally opened, and inside was a name that sent a ripple of dread through the room: Clara Dean. Within hours, the team tracked her down, a small-town nurse living 2 states away, her address pulled from an old employment record. When they called her, the voice on the other end trembled. "Why are you asking about that night?" she said. The producer hesitated. "We're investigating a possible switch at birth case involving 2 families." There was silence. Then a sob. "I knew this day would come," Clara whispered. 2 days later, she was on a flight to Los Angeles. The producers didn't tell Elaine or Mark. Not yet. They wanted answers first. When Clara arrived, she carried a weathered folder, decades old. Inside were handwritten notes, discharge forms, and a single hospital photo. She sat across from Dr. Phill, eyes red, voice shaking. I worked in maternity ward that night, she said. There was a storm. Power went out for nearly 2 hours. 2 babies, both boys, were born within minutes of each other. One mother lost too much blood. The other, I was told her baby didn't make it. She paused, gripping the file. But I knew that wasn't true. Dr. Phill leaned forward, his expression grave. Are you saying the babies were switched? Clara nodded slowly. Yes, and I tried to report it. But the nurse on duty, my supervisor, she was fired 3 days later. Everything got buried. The hospital wanted it quiet. Tears streamed down her cheeks. I was told to forget it. But how can you forget that you let 2 mothers live the wrong lives? Back in the hotel, Elaine was pacing. Her phone buzzed. An unknown number. She answered, voice trembling. Mrs. Whitmore? The voice was soft, hesitant. My name is Clara Dean. I think I know what happened to your son. The world around Elaine blurred. Who are you? She demanded. Clara's words cracked through the receiver like lightning. Your son didn't die. He was switched with mine. Elaine sank to the floor, the photo of baby Jacob falling from her hands. Switched? Why would anyone do that? It wasn't on purpose, Clara said through tears. It was chaos that night. But I've carried this guilt for 20 years. That evening, they met privately. No cameras, no audience, just 2 mothers bound by loss. Clara pulled out the photo of her newborn. The same date, same hospital. And Elaine gasped. The blanket, the wrist tag, they matched. They both cried without words for a long time. For the first time, Elaine wasn't angry. She just whispered, all these years, I was mourning a child who was never gone. Clara replied softly, and I was loving a child who was never mine. Meanwhile, in another room, Mark overheard fragments of their conversation through a partially open door. Switched at birth, 2 mothers, he stepped back, heart pounding. What are they saying? His voice cracked when he asked the producer directly. Are you telling me my real mother is someone else? And when he finally saw Clara, when their eyes met for the first time, something unexplainable passed between them. Recognition, grief, a wordless connection that DNA didn't need to prove. The studio decided to film the next day. Dr. Phill knew it wasn't just about evidence anymore. It was about healing what had been broken for 20 years. But as Mark prepared for that second taping, his thoughts darkened. If Clara was his biological mother, what did that make Elaine to him now? When the truth finds you, does it free you, or take everything you thought you were? The next morning, the studio was tense, the kind of quiet that comes right before a storm. Everyone knew this wasn't just another reunion episode. This was something deeper, rawer, and no one knew how it would end. Elaine arrived first, clutching that same photo of Jacob. Her face was pale but determined. She wasn't coming for closure this time. She was coming for truth. A few minutes later, Mark walked in. His eyes were red from a sleepless night. He didn't look angry, just hollow. Dr. Phill entered the room holding 2 envelopes. We ran another test, he said softly, looking from Mark to Elaine, then to the woman sitting quietly in the corner, Clara Dean. 1 for you, Mark, and 1 for Elaine. These will tell us who belongs to whom, and maybe, just maybe, help you all start healing. The air felt electric. Cameras rolled. The audience leaned forward. Dr. Phill opened the first envelope. Mark, he said, pausing. Clara is your biological mother. Mark closed his eyes. Clara gasped, and then, without hesitation, reached for his hand. Her voice broke. I knew it. Elaine, sitting inches away, pressed the photo of baby Jacob to her chest. For a second, she looked lost, like a mother watching her child disappear all over again. But instead of collapsing, she stood up and walked toward Mark. Her voice was steady, but soft. I may not have given birth to you, but you gave me something I never thought I'd have again. Hope. The room was silent. Mark hesitated, then stood. Slowly, he hugged her. Cameras captured the moment. 2 strangers bound by love, not blood. Dr. Phill spoke quietly. Sometimes, truth doesn't separate us. It simply shows us who's been loving us all along. Then he turned to Elaine with the second envelope. Elaine, this one's about your biological son. His name is David Whitmore. He's alive. The words hung in the air like thunder. Elaine's breath caught. "Alive?" she whispered. "After all this time?" Dr. Phill nodded. "We don't know where he is yet. But with the data from this test, we've already reached out to federal records. There's a strong lead." The audience gasped. Elaine's eyes filled with tears, not the despairing kind this time, but the kind that hold light after a lifetime of darkness. She turned to Mark, smiling through tears. "That means somewhere out there, someone still calls me Mom." Mark smiled back. "Then you have 2 sons now." Even the crew couldn't hold back their emotions. You could hear sniffles across the set. Dr. Phill looked at both mothers, then directly into the camera. "This story isn't about biology. It's about belonging. It's about how the truth, even when it hurts, sets us free to love deeper than before." Just as the lights dimmed for the final shot, a producer rushed in from backstage, whispering urgently in Dr. Phil's ear. He frowned, then looked at Elaine. "We just received a voicemail," he said carefully. "Someone's claiming to be David." The audience erupted in murmurs. Elaine's hands flew to her mouth. Dr. Phill continued. "He says he's been watching the show from Arizona, and he wants to meet you." The episode ended there, on that edge between heartbreak and hope. Elaine wept, clutching the photograph tighter than ever. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but for the first time in decades, she had something real again, a reason to believe. What happens when the truth finally calls your name, and you're brave enough to answer? 3 months later, the cameras were gone, but the story wasn't. Elaine sat on a park bench beneath an oak tree, sunlight flickering through the leaves. She clutched a bouquet of daisies, the same flowers she used to bring to the memorial for her lost son every year. Only this time, she wasn't there to mourn. She was waiting. From across the park, a tall man approached, nervous, cautious, holding his breath with every step. His name was David Whitmore, her real son, the one she'd been told had died. Elaine stood slowly, tears already forming before their eyes even met. For a heartbeat, they both froze, as if afraid that moving might break the fragile dream holding them together. Then, without a word, they embraced. Not like strangers, not like a mother and son trying to force a connection, but like 2 souls who finally found the missing pieces of themselves. "I used to talk to you," Elaine whispered, her voice trembling. "Every night. I didn't know if anyone could hear me, but I prayed you were safe." David smiled faintly. "I think I did hear you. Every time I wondered why I felt different. I think that was you." It wasn't a perfect reunion. It wasn't wrapped in music or applause. It was quiet, awkward, deeply human. And that's what made it real. A few feet away, Mark stood beside Clara, watching. He wasn't bitter. He wasn't broken. Just reflective. "Funny," he said softly. "I came here to find where I belonged, and somehow ended up with more family than I started with." Clara nodded, squeezing his hand. "Sometimes God gives us what we need, not what we expect." Later that evening, the 4 of them sat together at a small diner. 2 mothers, 2 sons, for lives forever changed by one night of chaos 20 years ago. There were no scripts, no cameras, no retakes. Just laughter mixed with tears, stories overlapping, healing happening in real time. Elaine passed an old photo across the table, baby Jacob, smiling in her arms. David studied it, eyes shining. "That's me," he said softly. Elaine smiled. "It always was." Mark glanced at them both. "You know," he said, "I used to think DNA was everything. But if it was, then why do I feel like I've known you my whole life?" Elaine reached across and took his hand. "Because love doesn't need proof, Mark. It just needs truth." For the first time in years, silence didn't feel empty. It felt peaceful. Weeks later, Dr. Phill shared an update at the end of his show. He spoke slowly, with that familiar weight in his tone. 3 lives collided in the pursuit of truth. But what they discovered wasn't just who they were. It was who they were willing to forgive. And that, he paused, is the kind of truth that goes beyond DNA. Back in that same park where it all began, Elaine planted the daisies beneath the oak tree. On a small tag, she wrote 4 names, hers, David's, Mark's, and Clara's, tied together with one ribbon. Not to replace what was lost, but to honor what was found. As the camera fades on the scene, her voice, older, softer, wiser. Echoes in narration. Family isn't who shares your blood, it's who shares your truth. And maybe that's the final lesson, that the deepest bonds aren't born in hospitals, but in hearts brave enough to forgive. Because sometimes the truth doesn't heal by itself. It heals when we face it together. If this story touched you, share it with someone who's searching for their own truth. You never know who might need to hear it tonight. And if you believe family is more than blood, stay with us for more stories that prove it. Because forgiveness isn't the end of a story, it's the beginning of peace.